appropriate to begin this event with a healthy round of thank yous to everybody, to the organizing team for going through at least 3 distinct planning exercises all in the last couple of weeks as the situation in the Chicago area has unfolded in order to make this event a success. There's a lot of logistics that go on behind the scenes, and anytime the location or forum changes, it means a lot of rework. And so big thanks to the organizing team for pulling this all together in show of our support and love for our dear spiritual master. Also, a big thanks to everyone here, especially those that are not from the Chicago area, for all the adjustments to your travel plans. Things looked a certain way, and then as the situation evolved, they looked another way. And so just a big thanks for the flexibility and understanding as that situation has evolved. On that note, I would like to formally introduce our first speaker for this weekend event, His Grace Parama Rupa Prabhu. So a little bit about Parama Rupa Prabhu, if you're not familiar. He is a spiritual advisor at 2 universities, Northeastern and Brandeis, visiting lecturer at Tufts University, and engineering manager at MathWorks. And he's an extremely educated and scholarly individual. And he has a very wonderful way of bringing the different spiritual teachings to life. And his enthusiasm for these teachings and sharing it is really palpable, and it'll become very clear as we hear him speak. And so he emphasizes taking these spiritual practices and showing just through his knowledge, his understanding, what he's received from our spiritual master, just how to apply them in a contemporary setting. So very much an emphasis on practical application, as well as the joys of this Krishna conscious philosophy. A few housekeeping rules. Request, please remain muted during the session until Q&A when you're called on if you have a question. As questions may come up, you can either type the question in the chat, and at the end, Kaumadi will read them in the order received, or if you prefer to ask your question directly, you can just type your name in the chat as an indication that you have a question, and when you are called on, you can unmute and ask your question. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be able to introduce you, Parama Rupa Prabhu, and looking forward to your presentation of Paradox of Happiness.
Thank you, Yashodanandan Prabhu, for your very kind introduction. I personally look up to Yashodanandan Prabhu for his very, I think, pertinent advices for these sort of presentations, and I value his feed very much. Let me start with Pranam Mantra. Om Ajnana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupaha Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadvas Adi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. So tonight I wanted to reflect on 2 verses of Bhagavad Gita, the 5th chapter, 22nd verse, and the 23rd verse, trying to bring out the message that when we are looking for happiness in this material world, and in a way, the result actually is misery. And I wanted to to go over some reasoning, trying to better deepen my own understanding of how Krishna is this paradox of happiness. So, what is the 22nd verse? It is a famous verse. You all, I'm sure, you know it. Yehi sansparshaja bhoga dukkha yonaya evate adyantavanta kaunteya na teshu ramate buddha. So, it is expressed that yehi sansparsha ja. So generally, all the experiences in this material world we have is by bringing our senses in contact with the sense objects. So that's essentially is seen as sparsha or making contact. And the word ja means that which takes birth from that kind of endeavor. So just like the Sanskrit word, so janma, you can see the root word is ja. So janma means the birth. So likewise, anywhere we see ja, that is signifying what is actually taking birth out of this. So yehi sansparsha ja bhoga. So bhoga is the experience that we go through by bringing our senses in contact with the sense objects in this material world. So Krishna is saying that when the desire to enjoy is there, as encapsulated by the word bhoga, while we are bringing our senses in contact with the sense object, Krishna is saying what you will get is dukkha. So dukkha yonaya evate. So yoni is seen as a species of life, and therefore yonaya is significant, is basically signifying the womb or the birthplace or a generating source. So when we are carrying a spirit of enjoyment by bringing our senses in contact with the objects in the material world, Krishna is saying that know that to be the womb for generating all kinds of dukkha. And then Krishna is rationalizing why that is so. That adi antavanta kaunteya na teshu ramate buddha. That's because everything that has got a beginning has an end. And because such pleasure, which is brought about by bringing our senses in contact with the sense object, has a beginning, therefore, they also have an end. And as a result of which, we as a spirit soul who is looking for everlasting happiness, we will not find ultimately happiness but misery, because it's going to end. And therefore, na teshu ramate buddha, those who are Buddha or those who are intelligent, they refrain from joy, matter in this way. So keeping this in mind, we will try to deepen our understanding of why our experiences in this material world are not providing lasting enjoyment. So one time Srila Prabhupada was giving a lecture, and one person in the audience asked, what is the reason for the creation of this material world? Prabhupada responded, enjoyment. And the person became very happy to hear that. And then Prabhupada then said that not yours, but Krishna's. So generally, when we come into this material world, we somehow or other carry this hotel mentality, that when you go to a hotel, you generally go through and then you select that, okay, I want this, I want that, I want this level of spice or whatever, So you want exactly the order to come as per your wish. And similarly, the living entities, during their sojourn in this material world, they develop this hotel mentality that at any given time, I would ask for anything that I want, and they need to get fulfilled. And if they are not getting fulfilled, there is something wrong, not with myself, but something wrong with the world around me. But actually, Prabhupada explains that the world is not really like a hotel, but it is meant to be either like a university where we are supposed to get life lessons, or it is just like a hospital. We come to the hospital to get cured of a particular disease. So likewise, we enter into the material world with a diseased mentality. And that diseased mentality is trying to selfishly extract enjoyment out of matter. So we forget the source of our existence, the Supreme Lord Krishna, and we want to independently find enjoyment in this material world. So that is considered to be our perennial disease. That's the disease of a conditioned soul. World acts as a good hospital facility because we have come into this world and we are getting commensurate experiences, commensurate to our mentality. And from those experiences, we are meant to learn some lessons that indeed this material is a place where we can find enjoyment by looking for enjoyment in a selfish manner, forgetting the source of our existence. So um, let's get to what are the different varieties of definitions that we come up with for happiness as we go through life. So one definition could be happiness is to get what we want and to not get what we don't want. Now you can imagine that that could be a very childish sort of definition, because if we know that the resources of the world are limited and our desires are unlimited, therefore it is just not going to be possible to get whatever we want. It's just very impractical to maintain this kind of um, mentality. Second idea could be happiness and excitement or an anticipation that a goal oriented endeavor may generate. In other words, we all the time are looking for happiness, but we are seldom finding it. We sometimes think of happiness like a commodity we find in a grocery store. We go through aisle after aisle and try to pick an item. This is my happiness, with the anticipation that this is going to give me happiness. So, in other words, happiness we correlate with the anticipation or the anxiety while pursuing some goal or pursuing some object in this material world. Or sometimes when we are faced with different situations of life, then we think that happiness is, after all, just a gap between two miserable events. Or somehow or other avoiding some condition of misery or a temporary cessation of a particular misery of life. Or sometimes people who go through a hangover, they may say happiness is just a sweet memory of a past experience. In other words, we tend to just live in the past, because after all, what matters is the trace that got left behind by a particular experience. And sometimes people go a little bit more extreme, and they may say that, okay, it's an agreeable sensation arising out of the misery of another. In other words, happiness in this material world oftentimes gets into the mode of jealousy, enviousness, where one's own happiness is not sort of in isolation with others' happiness, but it is sort of dependent on how much I'm getting in comparison with others. So we can see that none of these definitions are really very satisfactory definition, because they are concerning the conditions of this material world, and it's not giving us any lasting form of happiness. In any case, somehow or other, in our quest for happiness, have come to this sort of we are in a competition with the animalistic sort of way of finding happiness, because we find that animals are actually good in their finding happiness, because they find happiness in eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. So it is stated, as we know, that ahar, nidra, abhay, maithunam cha samanyam etad pashubhir naranam. These are the common factors between animals and human beings. So whatever animals are trying to do, humans are just trying to do the same thing, but in a more sophisticated way. But unless there is an acknowledgement of our reality beyond the eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, then we somehow or other still remain platform. So now, if you analyze carefully, actually animals are much better off than humans in getting whatever they want as per these four factors of extracting enjoyment. Because an elephant, if you see, an elephant can eat tons of food, but how much can we eat? Now, if we think that, okay, enjoyment is in the food, now somebody may give us a plate full of samosa. Now we take two samosas, great. Now, after we are fed, let's say 5 samosas, now it becomes a little more, it becomes a little too much. And then one forcibly gives us 10 samosas and then 15 samosas. And you can see after a certain point, we now develop a hatred towards the same object which brought in some enjoyment to begin with. So this is also saying that if we are thinking that our enjoyment is dependent on how much I can extract by bringing our senses in contact with the sense object, you should know that that very sense object is going to become the source of your misery in the future. So likewise, in this material world, when we are after this animalistic sort of sense gratification, then we cannot just compete with any animal, because there will be a particular animal which would be excelling in that particular habit much better than humans. Like a dog, like in dog in America, they are treated much better than many facilities that a human being can get in a developing country. Or a bear can sleep for many seasons. But how much can we sleep? Yes, sometimes people try to sleep for long hours. I have seen, like when I was in my college days, sleeping for 10, 15 hours sometimes becomes a norm. But that still doesn't really give us the necessary fulfillment. Yes, we get some relaxation for the time being, but can you compete with a bear? Probably not. So we find that if the sensual platform is considered to be a standard, animals have a much, much higher standard than us. And in fact, we find that there are some representatives from the animal kingdom where it is shown that even one sense object is sufficient to become the cause of their downfall. Just to kind of indicate, just to kind of driving home the point for the humans that if all the senses are prowling, we will be in a big mess. So, for example, a fish is generally caught by the taste. Somebody may put a bait, and then the fish is running after the taste, and that becomes the cause for its death. Or a honeybee, pulled by the fragrance of the flowers, and then it may get trapped within the flower, and then that may become the cause for its death. A deer is sometimes caught by the sound by a hunter, which may somehow in a particular direction, and then they are caught. An elephant sometimes is allured by brushing a female elephant by the touch, and then a hunter may take the elephant into a ditch. So in this way, we can find for each of the senses, there is a particular animal representing the downfall that can happen when we become too captivated by its attraction for the corresponding sense object. And we find to complete the whole picture, the fire, a moth may be attracted to the fire because of the sight, and then it gets charred by the same fire. So now let's now analyze. So what are the conditions that are necessary for an object to become the real source of our happiness? So I can say that there are actually three requirements that are necessary. One is the universality, that is, if there can really provide us happiness, it must have the caliber of satisfying everyone. Now, we see that take any object of the senses. Yes, we may be attracted to a particular sense object, may not be so attractive for another person. Like, for example, pizza. Now, sometimes kids like pizza a lot. But if we bring the same pizza to their grandparents, they may say, what are you eating? They may not necessarily have attraction towards the pizza. So in other words, pizza may be a great sense object for the kids, but it does not uniformly appeal to everyone or universally appeal to everyone. So so likewise, we can take different objects. We'll see that it does not carry the universality quality of providing happiness. The second criterion for an object to become a real source of happiness is endurance. That if I'm able to extract happiness out of an object, then that's endure and continue forever. Now we see that doesn't matter how expensive an object may be, however attractive an object may be to begin with, after possessing that object for a while, it somehow dissipates the taste that it in the very beginning brought at the outset. Therefore, we find that the happiness we are not able to hold on to forever. Like, for example, when we get a new cell phone or something, it has its initial charm that I got a phone. But then after a while, after using it for a while, it's okay. I mean, that happiness we are not able to carry forward. And the third criterion is potentiality, which means that if an object has the capacity to provide happiness, it must be able to provide happiness to everyone to the same degree. And we see that is also not satisfied. Let's take an example. For example, there is a character called Rohan Singh. And it so happened that the Rohan Singh was hospitalized for some reason. And news came to his wife that Rohan Singh passed away. And the wife literally fainted on the spot hearing such a devastating news. And then the news reached his only son. And the son piteously started. And then the same news reached the servant of the house. And the servant received the news with a lot of grief. But then the amount of grief that was experienced by his wife is not at all in comparison to the servant's feeling of grief. So the servant was also quite unhappy about the passing away of the lord of the house, but he was not that unhappy. And then somehow the news reached the neighbor, and the neighbor at that time was just browsing through some TV channel, and his focus was just on what he was seeing on the TV, and he heard from his wife that Rohan Singh passed away. So he just casually just processed, just continuing to maintain focus on the TV serial. And then he said, yes, sometimes God can be really harsh. And that's it. He continued to focus on the TV channel. And then finally, the same news also reached a debtor who um, who was supposed to pay back some money to Rohan Singh. So when he heard this news, he was elated. So in this way, we find different persons were receiving the news of Rohan Singh passing away with different degrees of their happy or sad emotions. Now, it so happened that the doctor had made a mistake. And then the next day, the news came, actually, Rohan Singh has not passed away. There was a mistake in evaluation. And now when the news reached his wife, she was very happy now. Than before. And then when the news reached the neighbor, he was continuing to browse his TV channel. He processed the news and he was okay. And when the news reached this debtor, he processed the news with a big concern that, okay, what happened? I thought God is doing a lot of favor to me, but that favor got taken away. So in this way, the same Rohan Singh is not providing the same degree of happiness to everyone. So therefore, as far as the conditions of happiness are concerned, universality, endurance, and potentiality, none of them are for any material object. Now you may analyze, where is the source of our happiness when we are looking for enjoyment in a material object? Does the material object itself have something of intrinsic value to provide happiness? So let's consider. So suppose a group of friends, they make a plan to go and enjoy their long weekend in a nice palatial building equipped with a lot of amenities. And then they were in front of a television where they are about to play their favorite movie. And everything was perfect. The temperature condition, the food was gorgeous that is around. But it so happened that out of nowhere, there was a cobra that appeared in the scene. Now, all the different paraphernalia for providing happiness, they're all intact. They were just there. The presence of that cobra. So in other words, ultimately, if we trace down where is the source of happiness coming, it's actually arising out of the mind. So now, when we are failing in generating the happiness with the three conditions that we just discussed, now what is the solution that a person who does not have any connection with spirituality? So therefore, the society is somehow reorganizing in this direction. So how can we still get happiness? So it is trying to work in two directions. One is somehow or other increase our choices, which means somehow or other increase our buying power by amassing as much money as possible. And second, just create as many objects as possible. Now the question is that, do these two directions actually provide any happiness, or do they really satisfy us? So there are actually 5 factors that further defeat us, even if we are increasing the number of choices in front of us, or increasing our own buying power by increasing our affluence by getting more money. So let's consider these 5 factors. The first is the opportunity cost. So when we have many choices that are offered in front of us, then what happens is make a decision about one object. We have to weigh in the pros and cons of all the options that are presented. So it's tremendous amount of opportunity cost to sort through. And therefore that causes anxiety. Like for example, when we just go to a store to purchase just a box of cereal, if there are like 50 choices that are presented, it's mind-boggling what to actually pick. And think about when you are making decisions like buying a car or even looking for a house. When there are too many choices that are presented, it just increases the opportunity cost and it increases our anxiety of making the right choice. And in fact, if you're not making the right choice, it actually reflects back on us, and the mind furthermore is going to tell what kind of go through the entire evaluation of the choices properly. The second is after you make the choice, you may start regretting about the choices you did not make. Like for example, if we are, say, we as a family, we are making a trip to Hawaii for one particular weekend. And then when we went to Hawaii, we found that that whole place, that particular island, it just filled with tourists. So now for every single thing, there is a long, long queue to go through. So then while we are in Hawaii, surrounded by the natural beauty of the island, our entire processing of the mind is now focused on the alternatives that we did not consider. We start regretting about the choices we did not make. I wish I had gone to a less popular place where I could enjoy a little more privacy. So in this way, it is just an example to drive home the point. The third problem is that as we get things in our life, our expectation, how much happiness I can expect from possessing an object. And we find that actually the more we get, the expectations, they just keep on growing. And especially when someone is coming from a success, then that high expectation is sort of passed down through generations as well, where the expectations from the parents also are very high. And that also creates a lot of anxiety. And then the fourth factor is that doesn't matter how we may get, as I was mentioning before also, there is this phenomenon of adaptation. Over a period of time, it does not have the same kind of glory that commodity had when we possessed it to begin with. So, for example, you may purchase a new Tesla with Falcon doors and the latest and the greatest model. Then after a while, the same Tesla may not have the same kind of excitement that it has given you at the time when you purchased it. And then another bigger problem is that happiness that we try to extract by bringing our senses in contact with the sense object is not based on just our experience. It's also based on the comparison that we are continuing to make with others. A story that I like to illustrate in this context is that there was a very poor villager who was residing in a simple hut. But somehow or other he got hold of a magical lamp. And this lamp was very special. It demon, a friendly demon. And the demon said, "What do you want?" And he said, "I want to fulfill my desires. I have a lot of desires to fulfill." And then this demon said, "Okay, I'm going to fulfill all your desires. Fine." But then when he heard that, he was so excited that he did not hear. And the demon said that, "I'm going to fulfill all your desires, but I will give your neighbor twice the amount." So anyways, he did not hear. And then because he was a poor person, so he was asking, "Can you please make me a 2-storied mansion?" And created the 2-storied mansion immediately. And then he was very happy. until he came out of the mansion and he found that he was surrounded by all four-storied mansions. And then he became sad. And then he said, "Can you please convert this into mansion, please, immediately?" And then immediately it got converted into 8-storied. And then when he saw that he is surrounded by 16-storied buildings, his heart sank again. And in this way, the more his desire filled, the more miserable he was becoming, because the happiness that he had, the definition of happiness that he was holding on to, is that it's not just sufficient to have whatever I am getting, but I would like to be better off compared to others. And somehow or other, it is not fitting in within that definition. And therefore, the more he was getting, the more miserable he was becoming. So therefore, we find that happiness in this material world is commonly based on envy. And as a result of which, we cannot ultimately derive lasting happiness. These are the 5 factors which are going to come at play even when we are increasing our number of choices in front of us. Even if our buying power is increasing, it's just giving us more misery. Now, there is one more interesting study. It's that to the positive and negative emotions in a disproportionate manner. So when we gain something, yes, there is a gain of good feelings, and when we lose something, we get some bad feelings out of it because of loss. But when we gained a particular object, we got some good feeling. But when we lost the same object, the bad feelings tend to overweigh the amount of good feelings we had got. And therefore, what happens is that when you increase the number of choices, initially there is a lot of increase of good feelings. But over a period of time, as the number of choices proliferate, what happens is that the bad feelings that come about because of the aforementioned 5 factors, they tend to overshadow the effect of good feelings. And therefore, the net effect is that as the number of choices is increasing, we tend to just succumb to negative emotions. All the positive emotions got overshadowed. And therefore, we are not able to extract real happiness. So therefore, we find that affluence certainly leads to increasing our access to the number of choices. But that ultimately is leading us more towards depression. So I hope this analysis you can see. So we so far made 1 point was based on what should be the criteria of the object of the senses to provide us happiness. And we talked about the universality criteria. We talked about the endurance. We talked about the criterion of the ability to provide the same amount of happiness for everyone or same degree, and that we call that we refer to as the potentiality. So we saw that no object in this material world actually fits in that bracket. And then suppose we somehow or other increase our access to the number, increase our number of choices. We found that because of the 5 aforementioned criteria, we end up having bad feelings or negative feelings. So with that, we can actually further bolster this point by noting down on what the billionaires of this world, before leaving this world, what do they say generally? So this is just one example. I mean, you can easily look up like what they say on their deathbed. So one such person who was having the net worth of more than $7 billion, he said that lying on the bed, sick and remembering all my life, I realized that all my recognition and wealth that I have is meaningless in the face of imminent death. Jim Carrey, in that regard, also has a very beautiful statement to say that I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer. And that's what we are establishing why that is so. So, what options are there now on the table? So, one option is that you keep chasing after the mirage and there is no end to it. And the second is that okay, miseries are there. We just keep forgetting those miseries by maybe taking to intoxication. And then thirdly, we may lower our expectations and then somehow or other cope up with the experiences in this material world. But that's not what is a recommendation from Krishna. So Krishna in the next verse is saying, Iheva yah sodhum prak sharira vimokshana kama krodhodbhavam vegam sa yuktah sa sukhi naraha. So who can become happy? So Krishna is giving that happiness formula just in the verse following this 22nd verse, where he had established that when we are trying to extract enjoyment by bringing our senses in contact with the sense objects, they are the causes of your misery. So how can we become happy? So Krishna is saying that shaknoti means if one is able to. Iha means in this world. Shaknoti iheva yah sodhum. Sodhum means to tolerate. Yah sodhum prak sharira vimokshana. Before giving up this body. So if before giving up this body, if one is able to tolerate, now tolerate what? Kama krodhodbhavam vegam. The urges that are generated by the kama and krodha, by our desires, by the forces of our desire and anger. And as we know, like second chapter, Krishna has stated that krodha comes from desire. The dhiyato vishayan punsa sangas teshu upajayate sangat sanjayate kamas kamat krodha abhijayate. Generally, the contemplation on the senses, they lead towards attachment. And when we become attached, then what happens is that it gives rise to desires for possessing them. But somehow or other, things are organized in such a way that lust can never be extinguished. It can only burn more and more like fire. So when you try to satisfy your desire, it is like pouring gasoline into the fire. And therefore, that fire which was burning with some small intensity will more and more strengthen by trying to fulfill those desires. And ultimately, because it is not going to give us satisfaction, therefore it leads towards anger, because anger is nothing but frustrated lust. So therefore, from kama comes anger, and anger is just a next door neighbor for the kama. So one may say that, okay, I do not have lust problem, I only have anger problem. But according to Krishna, the anger problem is just an indication of the lust problem. Because lust is there, therefore anger is there. So here Krishna is saying, if somehow or other, before leaving this body, if we are able to tolerate the urges which are coming forth, the force of desires and anger, then Krishna is saying, sa yuktaha sa sukhi naraha. Then such a person is perfect and also happy. So in the previous verse, Krishna used the term intelligent. Na teshu ramate buddha. And in take part in these kind of sources of misery which are generated from our trying to extract pleasure out of sensory contact. And in the next verse, Krishna is talking about who is perfect and who is actually able to become happy. One who is able to somehow or other tolerate these. And then Krishna in the next verse, he Krishna explains what would be the symptom of such a person. And Krishna uses these words that Atma Ratihi, then Atma Sukha, Atma Arama, then Antarjyoti. So, in other words, so Antar Sukha, Antarjyoti, and Antar Aramaha. In other words, one who is able to extract pleasure from within. That is the only way that we can stop ourselves from looking for outside. If we are not able to find our enjoyment in our intrinsic being, if we are not able to find enlightenment from within, then we would be looking for enjoyment outside. But unfortunately, happiness is not like a commodity that we keep looking for when we are shopping an item in a grocery store, but it is actually locked like a treasure in the core of our own heart, and we have to uncover it. So therefore, how would an intelligent soul extract happiness? Understanding these points from Krishna. So let's hear from a person who is not really connected with our Vedic tradition, but just because of his profession, he came to this understanding that we are spirit souls. Because bottom line is that in order to even look for lasting happiness, we need to first of all be grounded in our essential primordial reality. Now, I'm going to show a very small video snippet of a person called Brian Weiss, who is a graduate of Yale University. And in his life, he had been an agnostic. His profession as a psychotherapist, he happened to meet several cases which kind of pulled him in the direction of concluding that we are actually intrinsically spirit souls and we do not have anything to do with the outer covering. So it's sometimes useful to hear who are coming to the same conclusion which is presented by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. And if you hear his words, you can immediately see that he is resonating the message of the Bhagavad Gita.
The soul is that enduring part of us that doesn't the death of the physical body, that is immortal, eternal, that part of us that I was saying to the group that we never die because we're never really born. We existed before that, and then we come into a physical body, and at the end we move on. Now, there are many layers and levels. So we think of an individual soul, but really a soul connected to maybe one oversoul or an energy. So there are different ways to conceptualize that. But to me, the shorthand is that that's the immortal part of us, the eternal part of us. That's our real nature. So then when you see Talhar Desjardins and other people say that we are not spiritual beings we're not human beings having a spiritual experience, but rather spiritual beings having a human experience. That captures the nuance, the essence of it, and that has to be our soul. So as people towards thinking of themselves, understanding themselves more as a soul, as an enduring spiritual essence, or whatever you want to name it. It's that part of us that's ageless, timeless, that existed before all these other concepts, before the field, before energies, before words, before thoughts. So we can't really describe it, in my way of thinking, at a deeper level because we don't have the vocabulary for it. So the shorthand is it's the enduring part of us, the part that is forever, the part that's always being reunited with the souls of loved ones, either on the other side or back here in physical. And to me, that's the concept of the soul. And as people understand then that nature and the nature of true mind, deeper mind, then values start changing because we start seeing that we shouldn't be attached to these things that we're attached to, everyday material things, needs, opinions, being liked, being rewarded. When we free of ourselves of those kinds of connections and attachments, those needs, we become more soulful, because the soul doesn't need those things. The soul just needs to understand about love in all its different manifestations. And that's why we're really here in this earth school. So to me, that's what the soul is. And the more we understand that in our true nature, which is the soul, not the body, not the brain, then we become our authentic selves.
So therefore, a good definition of happiness based on this is to reconnect with the enduring essence of all of us, and trying to express or trying to experience the quality of that being. So that to the extent we are able to do that, to the extent we are able to internalize our experiences, to that extent we will experience lasting happiness. So now let's try to graphically understand this point. So right now we can see these three facets to our existence. There's body, heart, and mind. So heart is generally the seat for our soul, and then there is body, that is the gross covering, and the mind is the subtle covering inside the body. So right now we are placed in this outer world where there are so many different sense objects that are thrown, these black dots signifying the sense objects. So one of the goals of any person who is trying to go inward is to somehow to reach a harmony between the outer world and the inner world. So if we are able to harmonize these, then we are at peace with the inner world, and therefore we can experience the inner joy, the inner light. So now, in order to do so sometimes we find that the body may be focused on a particular sense object or a set of sense objects. The heart may be focused on some other sense object. The mind may be focusing on some other sense object. So in this way, there is no harmony existing. And sometimes, therefore, the yoga practitioners, at least those who sell the idealness, they try to say that you try to bring a sense of awareness within you and bring all of these faculties to a common center and make them cooperate. And in this way, you can try to harmonize the outer world and the inner world. So that could be one way of achieving that. But then we actually have a natural relationship between the heart, mind, and body, because heart is the inner self. And then there is the mind around, and then there is the body around. That is the true picture. And therefore, we have to now bring that reality into the forefront, understanding that the soul or the heart, where the soul is, it's actually a part and parcel of God. And God is the conscious source of our existence. And therefore, when we are talking about harmonizing the outer world and inner world, the best way to achieve it naturally is to bring them to the natural common center and make them aligned. So if the soul is a part and parcel of God, and everything that exists, they are part of the energies of the God, then the best way to harmonize would be to bring all of them to the natural common center, which means to make God the object of our meditation. So if we understand that, then we can now see how the chanting of Hare Krishna sense, because Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. These sound vibrations are non-different from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and they are encapsulating the energies of God. They're encapsulating the entire existential feature of God, bringing out the qualities of God, the all-attractive feature, and then the Rama being the source of all bliss, all together codified within the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. So when we chant these vibration. So what's happening is that we are trying to harmonize our outer world and inner world by bringing them to the common center, which is Krishna. So now we can see how, which is, I'm calling it as divine mindfulness, effective than a generalized sort of mindfulness. So let's consider an analogy at this point. Let's suppose our computer is infected with virus. And if our computer is infected with virus, one way to work with that infected computer is just carry on, just being aware that the computer is infected with virus, not worry about their presence, or try to become just totally oblivious of the presence of the virus. So sometimes, like while working, it may throw some unwanted on our face, and we may simply ignore, and we just carry on whatever we need to do. That's one way of handling. Another way of handling is really we consider how I can get rid of the virus. How do I purify my computer out of the virus? So out, that is similar to the divine mindfulness. The generalized mindfulness is just somehow you manage your subtle body, just become aware of your breath, aware of your existence, and so on and so forth. So the basic process in general mindfulness is awareness, but in divine mindfulness, it is about connection with God, and because of which there is purification. And because Mahamantra is non-different from God, it is purifying. It actually removes the diseased condition of the heart. Now, is a conception of God necessary to be just aware? No. Mindfulness, certainly a conception of God is necessary. In fact, a personal conception of God is necessary. Because after all, the part of that practice is to receive reciprocation back from God. And in the case of generalized mindfulness, the object of meditation, as you saw, it can be anything. It doesn't have to be necessarily purifying. You just try to make the inner world cooperate with the outer world. And in the case of divine mindfulness, on the other hand, the object of meditation has to be tangibly related to God. So here we emphasize the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, because Hare Krishna Mahamantra is non-different from God, and therefore it has that purifying potency, and therefore that is the name and the named. They are simultaneously the object and the process of our meditation. And so in the case of general mindfulness, the content of the mind does not need to change because you are simply aware. But in the case of divine mindfulness, indeed, the mind is going through a tremendous amount of purification. And therefore, the content of the mind is changing. And if you recall, initially when we were describing, the source of happiness is really somehow interjected by the mind. In other words, the source of our happiness is our being the spirit soul who is connected with the Supreme Lord, who is the source of our existence, but is connected. But the disconnecting power is coming from our mind, which is acting as a filter through which we are looking into the world and carrying different material conceptions of life. And therefore, if the mind is not purified of those material conceptions of life, we can never actually connect with our inner self. And we cannot experience, therefore, that Antar Jyoti, Antar Arama, and Antar Sukha, or the inner happiness. It will remain forever distant. And therefore, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he extols the qualities of, or the glories of the chanting of Hare Krishna Mahamantra in terms of these 7 qualities. That by chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, we'll get purity, we'll get peace, simplicity, awakening, happiness, immortality, and it will have a cooling effect all around us. So this is from verse number 1. And therefore, when we are talking about happiness, we are talking about the inner joy of the heart. We are not talking about just some temporary cessation of misery. We are not talking about just somehow or other adjusting to the situation. Because if you analyze carefully, our body just like the material world has been rubber stamped by Krishna as dukkhalayam ashashvatam. It's a place of misery, and it is temporary. But we have been awarded also a perfect equipment through which we can experience that misery. Consider the number of ways our body can provide happiness, and consider the number of ways our body can provide misery. So, for example, if you take a finger and just consider the different ways you can cause pain to the finger, there are multifarious ways. You can take a hammer and basically hurl that hammer on the thumb or any finger, or you can take a knife and cut. You can take a pin and then prick. There's so many ways to cause pain to just that little finger. But now if you consider how many ways can you provide happiness to that finger, you can see that we run out of ideas very quickly. And that is true for every single aspect of our body. So body is a perfect vehicle for actually receiving pain, while the soul is a perfect vehicle for us to receive happiness in our connection with the source of our existence. So the problem is that because we have disconnected ourselves with the supreme source, and we are looking for happiness outside, just like we look for a commodity in a grocery store, and therefore we are losing ourselves. We are losing the source of our happiness. And therefore, if we want to have lasting happiness, we have to go internal, and we have to go internal by adopting a purifying process, which will have an effect, which will have a cleansing effect, and it will purify our consciousness so that we can experience that inner joy. And this is a tried and tested formula. It is not something that has been just advocated by the Hare Krishna folks, but it has been there in the Kali Santara Upanishad. Iti Shodashakam Nam Kali Na Atah Paratara Upaya Sarva Vedeshu Drishyate. One cannot find a process more sublime than this, even if one goes through all the Vedic literatures. And it has been tried and tested by the greatest of the sages. And who else than Krishna himself, who appeared in the form of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, tasting this Mahamantra and distributing the Mahamantra to everyone, regardless of whether they have qualification or they do not have any qualification. So I hope we can meditate on this verse, or the set of verses that Krishna had, and understand that the source of our happiness is not objects, is not in bringing our senses in contact with the objects of the senses with the desire to enjoy, but the real source of our happiness is in connecting with our inner core, which is a part and parcel servant of Krishna. Try to connect by taking the help of a purifying object, which is connected with Krishna himself. So thank you very much. Any question or comment? You would have to unmute yourself.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. We have one question in the chat so far.
Okay, I can read it. Okay, you can go ahead. Read.
No, if you would like to, you definitely can, Prabhu. Sorry.
This analysis. Do you have advice on how to stay patient on the pursuit of spiritual happiness when we are so habituated to chasing it materially and feel okay with it being temporary or low standard? So we know the formula from Nectar of Instruction: Utsahan, Nishchayat, Dhairyat. So generally these three come together: the enthusiasm, the confidence, and patience. So to stay patient, we need to somehow get the energy from enthusiasm and confidence. So we have to be enthusiastic by making our connection strong with the members of the disciplic succession, whom we can gratefully, like as Maharaj had been really helping us understand the importance of humility and gratitude, the more we are able to internally feel grateful for all the gifts that we have received and we are receiving in our spiritual life, to that extent we can remain enthusiastic on our sadhana process as well as in our services, um, and then we can be also confident in the mercy of Krishna, understanding that yes, it may take some patience, but ultimately Krishna is supremely merciful, and therefore that mercy will come and act magically on our heart to purify beyond our comprehension. We heard during the winter retreat, this tat tenu kampam sumikshamano bhunjana evatma kritam vipakam ritvag bapurvir vidadhan namaste jivet yo mukti padesa dhaya bhag. That that one continues to maintain these three phases of existence, always being in the mode of acceptance, saying yes, yes, Krishna, I am open for whatever you are giving me. And then understanding that we have limited capacity to handle any situation, acknowledging our limitations in sifting through all kinds of life situations, we therefore fold our hands and say that please, so yes, and then we thank the Supreme Lord for giving us the mercy, and then we say, please help me out. In other words, we are simultaneously going through these three phases of existence, and while we are this, it requires patience. That yes, life situations would be carrying all kinds of flavors and colors, but if we look deeper or look in the hindsight, we'll find that there is a loving hand of Krishna. So while we are going through it, we have to say, Krishna, whatever you are doing, it's good for me. So that particular verse is the greatest guiding light that we have for cultivating patience, because we can repeat ourselves in this loop that yes, thank you, please. Yes, thank you, please. Yes, I accept the situation. Thank you for giving me your mercy in whatever form you're giving me. And please help me. So I don't know whether this answers the question, but at least that's what I feel inspired at this point. Is this okay? Or thank you. Any other question or comment? You may have to unmute yourself. One thing I wanted to also say that this whole sort of failure in our meeting with failure in our pursuit of happiness is meant to be connected with our strengthening humility, understanding how we are. So therefore, we can also connect this with the theme of the winter retreat that we went through. Okay, so not everyone was able to unmute. Okay. Rupa Vilas Prabhu, Hare Krishna, please accept my humble obeisance. Hare Krishna, how do we know if we are in sync with body, mind, and soul? Is it really possible to be in sync with body? As you said, it's made for misery, while soul is for happiness. Okay, nice question. So, body is a perfect vehicle for receiving pain when we are looking for happiness in sensory contact. But body can also be a vehicle to be utilized in Krishna's service, in which case the same body becomes the source source of pleasure. So pleasure, because this pleasure is a pleasure we get in reciprocation from Krishna. So there is pleasure in the austerity in that sense, because we may be utilizing our body in service of Krishna, engaging in voluntary austerity. And because of the loving reciprocation from inside, there will be essentially a lot of happiness from within. And then we know that the body, because it got employed in the service of Krishna, therefore there is a perfect harmony there. Another way of looking at it is by looking through the lens of the alignment point that Maharaj had made several times during the japa retreat. That we try to, as a part of our japa, we try to bring our body, mind, heart into perfect alignment. So what is that alignment? So body generally has to be kept in an erect position. In that sense, it is supporting our japa. Then the mind needs to be fixed on the sound vibration, trying to hear the holy name. And the heart needs to call out to Krishna that, Krishna, please accept me in your service. So this alignment that we try to bring in at the time of practicing mantra meditation is a way for us to bring body, mind, and soul in sync. So in other words, in both the ways I try to express, either body is engaged in the service of Krishna, or we are bringing body in alignment with the mind and our heart when we are engaging in japa meditation. In both cases, the body is actually seen as an instrument of service for Krishna. And because of that conception, that spiritual conception, there is a perfect alignment and there is a perfect compatibility. In fact, we are therefore using the body for the purpose it is meant for. It can also become the source for our internal happiness. I hope that answers the question. Rupa Vilas Prabhu, do you want to? Okay, thank you. Okay, from Amara Mataji, soul is blissful, but suffering in this material world. So what is the impetus to live in this world? How do we explain this to one who has no idea of Vedic knowledge? Okay, so there is suffering in this material world while the soul is blissful. So I think experience that we can provide to a person who is not connected to the Vedic culture would be more effective than trying to preach to the person or somehow drumming through his head that this is what is the reality. So simple things like partaking in Krishna Prasadam, partaking in loving sweet kirtan, just bringing the person in the loving, affectionate environment of devotee association. So those experiences will go a long way in trying to show how, yes, material world is filled with suffering, but the soul can still become blissful in the association of devotees. And therefore that can generate the impetus for living in this world, because then we see that every single aspect of our existence is meant for Krishna's service, and when or to the extent that they are engaged in Krishna's service, they reach their ultimate potential for happiness. And therefore that only experience can help in bridging the gap between what they know through their experience in this material world and what our Vedic scriptures are giving. Now, of course, if the person is in receptive mode, then one can sort of gradually start from establishing who we are, and then talking about what is the reason for our existence, that we exist to cooperate with the senses of the Supreme Lord Krishna. That's the reason for our existence. But somehow or other, we are going through a phase of amnesia, and as a result of which we have forgotten. And so one can establish those points. And this material world, although it's a place where we find misery, but it can also act as a rectification facility. Because if suppose, like a simple example can be given, if suppose a particular part of my body has become diseased, but I'm not experiencing any pain whatsoever in that part of the body. So I may continue to engage that part of the body in all kinds of ways, which is detrimental to the health of that part. Now, because there is no pain in that part, I just somehow misused that part. But instead, when there is pain in that particular part of the body, we would be extra cautious. We would be probably putting some medicine. We would be thinking about how to cure that particular place which has become sore because of pain. So in this way, pain is sort of a necessary ingredient for us to bring to our senses that what is reality. What can I do to alleviate that pain? Our pain is also signifying that there is something unnatural going on, or there is something diseased going on. So likewise, the pains of this material world, the sufferings that exist in this material world, is to give us an assurance that this is not a place for our permanent residence. And therefore, we should not try to look for a green card in this material world, but rather think about where we belong and try to focus our energy in going there. Is that okay? Okay. Any other question or comment? Okay. Question from Girvaradhari Prabhu. Does desire originate from soul or mind? So when I was using the term desire, I was using the term to mean material desire. And I was therefore using material desire as synonymous with lust. But when we are talking about primordial desire, soul is the seat for any desire, because soul has got, the soul can make choices, and the choices that the soul can make is that I can live in harmony with God, or I can serve God, or the soul can choose to find enjoyment independently of God. So the soul can make those kind of choices. The mind comes into picture as a filter and as a reinforcer of the false ego when we are misidentifying with our covering in this material world. And therefore the desires that get, the pure desire of the soul, when it gets filtered through the mind, then that becomes material desire. And that material desire is just going to entangle us more and more into the clutches of this material world, because those desires are all directed towards how I can buy different objects of sense gratification. But the original desire of the soul is always to go internal. It's to kind of leave the sense objects behind and try to see what is my eternal connection with Krishna, how I can act in my loving relationship with Krishna. So that is the pure desire of the soul. So the summary answer would be that the desire originates in the soul filtered by our subtle body. And when it gets filtered by our subtle body, then what manifests are all kinds of colored consciousness. Another analogy that can be kept in mind is that the original desire is just like white light, which is emanating from the soul. And when that white light passes through the prism of the modes of material nature, then what comes out is colored consciousness. And the colored consciousness gives rise to colored desires, or different varieties of desires which are selfish, which are of selfish nature, and which tries to keep us going on the path of trying to find enjoyment independently of Krishna. Is that okay, Girivardhar Prabhu? Is it that no one can speak?
Everyone is able to speak now, Prabhu.
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Very detailed answer, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Okay, so if there is no other question, I beg for your blessings, and I hope I did not offend anybody while I was trying to present a picture. And I'm sure, like many of you, know a lot about this subject that we were discussing today. It's just that I am painting the picture in a particular way that I have processed. And please feel free to share with me later also if there is any correction or any addition you want to bring to this understanding. But thank you very much for kindly joining the session. I'm very grateful to all of you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Recording stopped.
Thank you, Prabhu, for that wonderful class. We will meet again tomorrow at 7:30 a.m. Central Time for a class by His Holiness Ramapada Maharaj on humility, the preliminary to gratitude. Thank you all very much. Hare Krishna. Good night.